The day my son threw me out of my own house while I was caring for his dying father. I thought my life had ended. I was homeless, broken, and betrayed by the child I raised. But what happened next will shock you, because fate turned my tears into gold, and my revenge was sweeter than honey. The rain poured down that night, cold and merciless, soaking through my thin shawl as I stood outside the very house I had once called home. My son's voice still rang in my ears, harsh and heartless. "Get out, mother. You're not welcome here anymore." It felt unreal. Just hours before, I had been at his father's bedside, wiping his forehead as he struggled to breathe, whispering prayers for his peace. I had devoted my entire life to this family, especially in those painful last days when my husband needed me most. But my son, my own flesh and blood, had decided I was nothing but a burden. He slammed the door in my face. The lock clicked, sealing me out forever. My heart shattered. My feet trembled. I had nowhere to go. I was homeless, abandoned, left to wander in the night while the man I loved more than anything lay dying inside. And yet, little did my son know, fate had already written another chapter for me. A twist he could never imagine. The same woman he threw into the cold, empty streets would soon rise again. Wealthy, powerful, untouchable. And when my revenge came, it would be so sweet. But back then I had no idea what was waiting for me. Now let me take you back to the beginning, so you understand how love turned into betrayal, and betrayal turned into destiny. Life wasn't always filled with pain. I remember when our home was warm with laughter. My husband, Richard, was a tall, gentle man with a laugh that could melt any anger. He had built our modest home with his own hands, brick by brick, while I raised our only son, Daniel. Daniel was once a sweet boy. He used to run into my arms after school, begging me to bake his favorite apple pie. He was my pride, my joy, the reason I woke up every morning. If anyone had told me that this same boy would one day cast me out like a stranger, I would have laughed in disbelief. But life has a way of testing the heart. Richard fell ill when Daniel was already a grown man. The sickness came like a thief in the night, first with small pains, then with weakness, until my strong husband could no longer stand on his own. I became his nurse, his cook, his strength. Every breath he took felt like a battle, and I fought beside him. First, Daniel would visit. He would bring groceries, sometimes sit with his father, but the visits grew shorter, the calls fewer. His excuses multiplied: work, stress, no time. Soon I noticed something else. Impatience. The warmth in his eyes faded whenever he looked at me. He began to see me not as his mother, but as a weight dragging his life down. Still, I never imagined he could go as far as he eventually did. One evening, while Richard slept, I overheard Daniel talking on the phone. His words pierced me like knives. "I can't live like this anymore. She's always here, crying, begging. Father's never going to recover. When he's gone, I want the house. I'll find a way to push her out." I froze. My son, the child I had raised with love, was planning my downfall. My heart broke, but I told myself I must have heard wrong. Maybe stress had made him say things he didn't mean. Maybe he was angry. Mothers are quick to forgive, even when we shouldn't. So I stayed silent. The days went on. Richard grew weaker, and Daniel grew colder. I could feel him watching me, waiting, until the night it finally happened. Richard was gasping, each breath like fire in his chest. I clutched his hand, whispering, "I'm here, my love. Hold on." Daniel barged in, eyes sharp, face twisted in a way I had never seen before. "This is enough," he snapped. "You can't stay here anymore. You're ruining everything." I stared at him, stunned. "Your father, he's dying. Can't you see?" But he didn't care. With anger in his eyes, he grabbed my arm, dragged me through the hall, and shoved me out into the storm. My husband's cries echoed behind me as the door slammed shut. I banged on the door, screaming his name, screaming my son's name, but no one came. Only the rain answered me, washing my tears into the dirt. That was the night I became homeless. But that was also the night fate began to move. Because what Daniel did not know was that my life was about to change forever. And when it did, the world would remember my name. The next morning, weak and trembling, I sat on a park bench, clutching the little bag I had managed to grab before being thrown out. Inside it were only a few clothes and an old photo of Richard and me. My heart ached. Not only for my husband who was slipping away, but for the betrayal that had crushed me. I thought of ending it all. Truly I did. What was left for me in this world? No home, no son, no comfort. Only grief. But then something strange happened. A car pulled up near the park. Out stepped a woman I hadn't seen in years, an old friend from long ago. She looked at me, her eyes wide with shock, and said, "Elizabeth? Is that really you?" I blinked, unable to believe my eyes. And in that moment I knew fate had just opened a new door. I rubbed my eyes, thinking the rain had made me see ghosts. But no, it was real. Standing before me was Margaret, my childhood friend. The girl I had once shared secrets and dreams with when we were little girls in school. "Elizabeth, my God," she gasped, pulling me to my feet. "What happened to you? Why are you sitting here in the cold like this?" Her voice carried the same warmth I remembered, and for the first time in many nights, I felt seen. Tears welled in my eyes as the weight of everything came crashing down. I tried to speak, but all I could do was cry. She held me like a sister. "Come with me," she whispered. "You can't stay here." Margaret led me into her car, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and drove me away from the park bench that had been my only shelter. I stared out the window, numb and broken, until we arrived at her home. A large, beautiful house glowing with light and comfort. The smell of food drifted through the air, and I almost wept again. Inside, she sat me down and made me tea. "Now," she said gently, "tell me everything." My lips trembled as I spoke. I told her about Richard's illness, about the endless nights by his side, about how Daniel had changed from the sweet boy I once knew into a stranger filled with greed. I told her how he had thrown me out while his father was still breathing his last breaths. Margaret listened quietly, her eyes dark with anger. "How could he?" she muttered. "After everything you've given him?" I shrugged helplessly. "He doesn't see me as his mother anymore. To him, I'm just an obstacle." Margaret reached for my hand. "Elizabeth, I can't replace your husband, and I can't undo your son's betrayal. But you are not alone. I have a plan that might just change your life." I frowned. "What plan?" Her lips curved into a mysterious smile. "Do you remember my uncle, the one who used to invest in properties? Before he died, he left me contacts, people who know how to turn even a small sum into fortune. I never used them, but I believe this is the right time. I want to help you." I stared at her, stunned. "Me? I have nothing, Margaret. No money. No home." "Sometimes," she said softly, "fate brings the right people together at the right time. Maybe this is your moment." The next few days passed in a blur. Margaret insisted I stay with her. She gave me clothes, food, and most importantly, dignity. Slowly, I began to stand tall again. But my heart ached every night when I thought of Richard. I wanted to be there with him, hold his hand one last time. Margaret tried to stop me, but one afternoon I slipped out and returned to the house I once called home. I stood across the street, watching through the window. My husband was lying weak on the bed, his breath shallow, his eyes half closed. I pressed my palms against the cold glass, whispering, "I'm here, Richard. I haven't left you." Then I saw Daniel walk into the room. He looked restless, pacing back and forth. He wasn't comforting his father. He was rifling through drawers, pulling out papers, opening cabinets. My heart sank. He wasn't worried about his dying father. He was already searching for property deeds, bank documents, anything that tied to the inheritance he craved. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burst through that door and tear the papers from his hands. But I knew he would throw me out again, maybe even call the police. So I swallowed my rage and walked away, my chest burning with pain. That night, I told Margaret what I had seen. Her eyes narrowed. "Elizabeth, this is more serious than I thought. Your son doesn't just want you gone. He wants everything." 2 weeks later, Richard passed away. The news came to me through a neighbor, not from my son. Daniel didn't even bother to call. I collapsed to the floor, my cries filling the air. My heart felt ripped apart. Not only by grief but by the cruelty of the man my son had become. I wanted to attend the funeral. I wanted to say goodbye to the man I had loved for more than 30 years. But when I arrived at the church, Daniel blocked my way. His face was hard, his voice colder than winter. "You're not welcome here, Mother," he hissed. "You abandoned us. You have no place in this family anymore." Gasps filled the room as people turned to watch. Some whispered, others shook their heads in shame. My knees weakened. The coffin was just a few steps away, but my own son stood like a wall between me and my husband's final rest. Tears blurred my vision. I begged, "Please, Daniel. Just one last look. Let me say goodbye." He sneered. "Goodbye is for family, and you're no longer mine." He ordered 2 men to escort me out. The door slammed behind me, shutting me out of the funeral of the man I had devoted my life to. I fell to the ground outside, wailing like a child. The betrayal cut so deep I thought I would never recover. But as I sat there, shaking in sorrow, Margaret's words echoed in my mind. Sometimes fate brings the right people together at the right time. Maybe this is your moment. And I realized something. If my own son had buried me with his cruelty, then fate would resurrect me with power. A week later, Margaret introduced me to a man named Mr. Harris, one of her late uncle's trusted contacts. He was tall, gray-haired, and sharp-eyed, the kind of man who could smell weakness but also recognize hidden strength. Margaret said, "This is the woman I told you about. She has nothing now, but she has fire. And with the right chance, she could have everything." Mr. Harris studied me for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "Elizabeth, I can give you an opportunity. But you must promise me something. You must never look back with fear. Once you take this path, you'll either rise to the top or lose everything." I swallowed hard. "I've already lost everything," I whispered. "I have nothing left to fear." He nodded slowly. "Good. Then I'll show you how to turn your pain into power." My heart pounded. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of the life I never dreamed I could have. But I had no idea the price that would come with it. Because on the very night Mr. Harris agreed to help me, something shocking happened. Something that shook me to the core and changed everything about my journey. That night, I couldn't sleep. Mr. Harris's words echoed in my head. "Once you take this path, you'll either rise to the top or lose everything." Margaret had gone to bed, but I sat by the window, staring at the moon, my heart racing with both hope and fear. Then, just past midnight, the sound of a car screeched outside Margaret's house. My chest tightened. Seconds later, a fist banged on the door, loud and violent. Boom, boom, boom. Margaret ran out of her room, frightened. Who could that be at this hour? Before we could move, a voice shouted through the door. "Elizabeth, open this door right now." My blood ran cold. It was Daniel. I froze, every muscle in my body stiff with fear. How did he know where I was? What did he want at this hour? The pounding grew louder. "Elizabeth, don't make me break this door down," he barked. Margaret's face turned pale. "Do you want me to call the police?" she whispered. But I shook my head. I didn't want to create a scene. My heart ached, because despite everything, this was still my son. I forced my trembling legs to move, and I opened the door. Daniel stormed in, his eyes blazing. He looked at me with pure hatred. "So this is where you've been hiding? With strangers, while father died alone." His words cut through me, but I stood my ground. Richard did not die alone. I was there for him every second, until you threw me out. Don't twist the truth, Daniel. His jaw tightened. You ruined everything. The neighbors are whispering, the church is gossiping. They think I'm a monster. And now you're here, spreading lies about me, trying to make me look like the bad son. I could barely believe his audacity. You are the bad son. I snapped. You turned your back on your dying father, and you cast your own mother into the streets. What kind of man does that? For a moment, silence filled the air. His nostrils flared. His fists clenched. Then, without warning, he slammed his hand on the table so hard the cups rattled. I'll make sure you regret this, mother. You'll never see a single cent of father's estate. Not one coin. Margaret stepped forward, her voice firm. Daniel, get out of my house. You've said enough. He turned his glare on her, then back at me. You'll be sorry, he spat. Mark my words. And with that, he stormed out into the night, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. I collapsed into the chair, shaking uncontrollably. Margaret wrapped her arms around me, whispering, "Don't be afraid, Elizabeth. He's angry because he knows he's losing control. You're stronger than him now." But inside I was terrified. If my own son could look at me with such hatred, what else was he capable of? The next day, Mr. Harris introduced me to his office, a tall building in the city, buzzing with people in suits, carrying files and speaking into phones. I felt small, like a beggar who had stumbled into a king's court. But Mr. Harris placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Elizabeth, the first step is learning. You must learn how money moves, how to spot opportunities, how to be patient but bold. Are you ready?" I nodded, though my knees shook. For weeks I studied under him. I learned about properties, investments, how to take something small and turn it into something great. At first, it felt impossible. Numbers and documents blurred together. But every time I thought of Daniel's cruel words, every time I remembered the rain-soaked night he left me homeless, a fire lit inside me. I refused to give up. Margaret cheered me on. "Every queen starts as a servant," she told me one evening. "You're rebuilding yourself, Elizabeth. One day, Daniel will bow before the woman he tried to destroy." I clung to those words. Months passed, and slowly, I began to change. I made my first small investment in a piece of land no one cared about. People laughed at me. But within weeks, a company announced they were building a new road nearby, and the value of my land tripled. When Mr. Harris showed me the papers, confirming my first profit, I wept. It wasn't millions yet, but it was a spark. And sparks can grow into wildfires. I was no longer just a widow cast aside by her own son. I was becoming something else, something stronger. But just when I thought I was finally rising, Daniel struck again. One morning, as I walked into Mr. Harris's office, I found 2 policemen waiting. Their eyes scanned me with suspicion. "Elizabeth Harper?" one asked. "Yes." I replied nervously. "You're under investigation," the officer said. "Your son has filed a report, accusing you of stealing money from your late husband's estate." The world spun. My son had gone beyond cruelty. He was now trying to destroy me legally. My knees buckled, but Mr. Harris caught me before I fell. He looked at the officers calmly and said, "Gentlemen, you've made a mistake. This woman has not touched a cent of her husband's estate, and I will personally prove it." But inside I knew. This was war. The words "under investigation" echoed in my mind like thunder. My son, my own flesh and blood, had painted me as a thief. The policemen questioned me, their voices sharp, their pens scratching across their notepads. "Mrs. Harper, your son claims you withdrew large sums of money from your late husband's account shortly before his death. What do you have to say about that?" I shook my head, stunned. "That's impossible. I never touched his accounts. Daniel controlled everything after Richard fell ill." But the officers didn't seem convinced. They handed me a paper. "You are expected in court. If these claims are true, you could face charges." As they left, my hands trembled. Tears blurred my vision. I turned to Mr. Harris. What if the court believes him? What if I lose everything before I've even started? Mr. Harris's face was calm but stern. "Elizabeth, listen to me. This is what greedy men do. They twist the truth. But I've seen enough of you to know you are not a thief. If Daniel wants a fight, then we'll give him one. But you must promise me something. Do not let fear break you. Fear is exactly what he wants." I nodded slowly, though fear already wrapped around my chest like chains. The days before the trial were torture. Margaret never left my side. At night, she sat by my bed whispering, "This is just another storm, Elizabeth. And storms don't last forever." Still, my heart ached. I thought of Richard, of how ashamed he would be to see the son we raised dragging his own mother through court. Sometimes in the silence of the night I asked myself, did I fail as a mother? Did I raise him wrong? But every time I remembered that rain-soaked night, the door slamming in my face, I knew the truth. Daniel's greed was not my creation. It was his choice. The day of the trial arrived. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors whispered, reporters scribbled notes, and at the center sat Daniel dressed in a fine suit, his face smug and cold. When he saw me walk in, he smirked as though victory was already his. The judge called the session to order. Daniel's lawyer rose first, painting me as a desperate woman who had stolen from her dying husband. She saw her husband's sickness as a chance to grab what she could before he passed, the lawyer declared. Her son, Daniel Harper, is the rightful heir, and she must be held accountable. Gasps filled the courtroom. My body shook. It felt as if the ground would swallow me. Then Mr. Harris stood. His voice was steady, sharp, and full of authority. Your Honor, the claims made against my client are false. We have records from the bank, signed by the manager, proving Mrs. Harper never withdrew a single penny. On the contrary, Mr. Daniel Harper made multiple transactions himself. The courtroom erupted. Daniel's face twisted in rage. He slammed his fist on the table, shouting, "Lies!" But the judge silenced him. Order in the court. One by one, the documents were presented. Witnesses came forward. Even the bank manager testified that Daniel had taken full control of his father's accounts months before his death. My son's lies began to crumble like sand in the wind. For the first time in months, I lifted my chin and looked straight at him. His eyes met mine, full of fury. And in that moment I realized he was terrified. Because truth was winning. The trial lasted for hours. At the end, the judge spoke. There is no evidence that Mrs. Elizabeth Harper stole from her husband's estate. The accusations are dismissed. Furthermore, the court finds Mr. Daniel Harper's conduct suspicious and recommends a deeper investigation into his management of the estate. Cheers erupted from the gallery. Margaret squeezed my hand, whispering, "You did it, Elizabeth. You won." But even in victory, my heart felt heavy. I looked at my son, my only child, and saw not relief but hatred so deep it made my blood run cold. Daniel stormed out of the courtroom, his eyes promising vengeance. Weeks passed. The case was closed and I was free. My small investments with Mr. Harris continued to grow. I bought another piece of land and then another. Slowly, money began to flow into my life. I could feel my future changing piece by piece. Fate was keeping its promise. But fate is never done testing us. One evening, as I returned to Margaret's house, I noticed the front door slightly open. My chest tightened. "Margaret!" I called softly, stepping inside. The living room was in disarray. Papers scattered, a chair overturned, the vase on the floor shattered. Panic shot through me. I rushed into the kitchen, then the bedrooms, calling her name. Silence. And then on the dining table I saw it. A note written in messy, angry handwriting. It said, "You took everything from me, Mother. Now it's my turn. If you want to see Margaret alive again, bring me every cent you've made. Or you'll never see her again." My hands shook as the note slipped from my fingers. My son had kidnapped my best friend. The war between us had just turned deadly. The note slipped from my trembling fingers. My knees went weak as the words echoed in my head. "If you want to see Margaret alive again, bring me every cent you've made." My own son, my flesh, my blood, had crossed a line no mother could have imagined. Betrayal was one thing. Greed was another. But kidnapping my only friend? That was evil. Tears stung my eyes. I whispered into the empty room. "Why, Daniel? Why have you become this monster?" But there was no answer, only silence. I knew I had to act fast. Margaret's life was in danger, and Daniel was desperate. Desperate men do foolish things. I grabbed the note and rushed to Mr. Harris. He read it slowly, his face growing darker with every word. "Elizabeth, this is serious. Your son has crossed into crime. If you give him your money, he won't stop. He'll destroy you." "But Margaret," I sobbed. "I can't let her die." He placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Then we must outsmart him. Money won't save Margaret. Strategy will." That night, we went to the police. They listened carefully, their expressions grim. "This is dangerous," the chief said. "We'll set up a trap. You'll go to the meeting point he chooses, with a bag that looks like it's filled with your fortune. We'll be waiting in the shadows. Once he shows himself, we'll strike." My heart pounded. The thought of facing my son in such a moment tore me apart. Part of me still remembered the little boy who once held my hand, begging me to read him bedtime stories. But that boy was gone. The man standing in his place had chosen a path of darkness. The next day another note came. The instructions were clear. "Come to the old warehouse by the river at midnight. Come alone. Bring the money. I held the note in my shaking hands, knowing that night could change everything. Midnight came. The air was thick, the moon hidden behind clouds. I walked toward the warehouse, clutching the heavy bag stuffed not with money but with stones. My heart thumped so loud I thought it would burst. Inside the warehouse, the darkness was broken by a single hanging bulb. And there he was. Daniel. His face was gaunt, his eyes wild. He looked nothing like the boy I had raised. "Mother," he said, his voice dripping with bitterness. "So you came. Where's the money?" I lifted the bag. "It's here. Now where's Margaret?" From the shadows Margaret appeared, her hands tied, her face pale with fear. My heart broke at the sight of her. "Let her go, Daniel," I begged. "Take the bag and let her go." He laughed bitterly. "Do you think I'm a fool? You think I don't know you've been working with Harris? You think I don't know you've become rich while leaving me with nothing?" His eyes burned with rage. "All my life, you chose father over me. You cared for him, not me. And now you think you can live in luxury while I rot? No. If I can't have it, you won't either." He snatched the bag, opened it and saw the stones. His face twisted with fury. "You tricked me." Before he could move, police officers emerged from the shadows, guns raised. "Drop the knife, Daniel." He froze. I hadn't even noticed the knife in his hand until then, glinting under the dim light. His eyes darted between me, Margaret, and the officers. For a moment I saw the boy he once was, afraid, cornered, lost. But then the man he had become returned, and with a snarl he lunged. The officers tackled him to the ground. The knife clattered away. Margaret screamed. I stood frozen, my heart breaking as I watched my son being dragged away in handcuffs, cursing my name. "Mother," he shouted, his voice full of venom. "You'll pay for this. You'll regret it." But deep inside I knew it was he who would regret the path he had chosen. After that night, life was never the same. The trial against Daniel was swift and merciless. He was found guilty of kidnapping, attempted extortion, and fraud. The boy I had once sung lullabies to was sentenced to years in prison. I wept not because justice was wrong, but because motherhood is a bond that never dies, even when the child destroys it. A part of me still loved him, but love could not erase what he had done. Margaret, safe at last, stayed by my side. "Elizabeth," she said one evening, holding my hand, "you lost a son, but you found yourself, and you are stronger than I have ever seen you." Mr. Harris continued to guide me, and my fortune grew. What started as a small investment blossomed into an empire of properties and businesses. Within a few short years, I was no longer the homeless widow Daniel had thrown into the rain. I was a millionaire. One day, I stood before the gates of the grand house I had purchased, the sunlight gleaming on its windows. Reporters snapped photos calling me a success story. A woman who rose from nothing to everything. But inside me, it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the lesson. That betrayal can break you, but it can also build you. That sometimes family can wound you deeper than strangers, but you must rise, not for revenge but for your dignity. Still, when I heard Daniel's name whispered in the news, the disgraced son of the millionaire widow, I couldn't deny a small spark of satisfaction. Yes, fate had turned me into a millionaire. Yes, my revenge had been sweet, but the sweetest victory of all was that I had survived. Life lesson. Never let betrayal define your ending. Even when the people closest to you turn against you, your strength can carry you to heights they never imagined. Pain can be the seed of power, and survival itself is the greatest revenge. If you think my story ended here, you're wrong. What came next was even more shocking. Don't miss the next part. Subscribe now so you don't miss how my sweetest revenge unfolded.